Hello, and welcome to another episode of After School. I'm Heather Hying, and today we're going to talk about sex and gender. I'll be reading to you a chapter from the book that I co-authored with my husband, Bret Weinstein, A Hunter-Gatherer's Guide to the 21st Century, Evolution and the Challenges of Modern Life. Sex and Gender, Chapter 7. It's 1991 in Managua. We have been traveling through Central America all summer, narrowly missing a full eclipse in southern Mexico after driving all night to see it, watching monkeys prepare for sleep in the shadow of Tikal, snorkeling and sleeping in hammocks on a tiny key that we had all to ourselves for 3 days off the Caribbean coast of Honduras. Now, we are in Nicaragua, meandering through a large outdoor marketplace, wandering apart whenever a fruit Bret hasn't seen before catches his eye, or the smell of fresh baked goods catches my attention. We are both comfortable being alone. Neither of us sees coming what happens next. I find myself suddenly surrounded by a crowd of young men who seem like all hands and arms, reaching yet not ever quite grabbing or groping. There are 8 or 10 of them, and they begin to move all in the same direction, pushing me along with them toward the edge of the market. I begin to shout, and the young men continue to move me with them, but Bret shows up fast. He yells at them, and they stop. I push myself out of the mob and stand away from them, breathing hard. Then the young men line up, all of them, and one by one, they apologize to Bret. I am furious, as is Bret. We are also both surprised. As much as macho culture is real, we hadn't seen anything like this before. We have just gotten a view into some traditional gender norms, one in which women are viewed as the property of men. You apologize for trying to take someone's property. You don't apologize to the property. Our work in evolutionary biology has since revealed to us that the roles of men and women have been distinct for most of human history. But this was the first time that either of us was face-to-face with some of their most unfortunate manifestations. Regressive behavior like this is familiar from history and literature both, and leads many people today to believe all traditional gender norms as regressive. This thinking, however, is a mistake. When sex was scarce, or at least less ubiquitous than it is now, men would move mountains for the right woman, with immense societal consequences. The Taj Mahal was built in memory of the Mughal emperor's favorite wife. Odysseus, returning after 20 years away in war and voyage, won back Penelope's love by passing a test of skill and killing her other suitors. And of course, there is Helen of Troy. No group of young women would surround a young man in the same way that the men surrounded me in that Nicaraguan marketplace. If they did, considerable numbers of young men would appreciate it. Wars don't start over the love of a good man. Temples aren't generally built to impress husbands. None of this happens if the sexes of the players are reversed. What happened in that marketplace is offensive to modern mores because it reveals a belief in women as resources to be exchanged rather than as whole entities with all attendant desires and aspirations. Modernity does not abide that, nor should it. But some traditional gender norms will be more tenacious than others. Today, men and women work side by side in nearly all domains. Both sexes have broken through boundaries once thought impossible to break, to the benefit of individuals and society alike. Some of the population-level differences that have long been attributed to men and women turn out to be mutable. Women should not be confined to healing or teaching professions, nor men to ones requiring brute strength or raw ambition. Recognizing these things does not mean, however, that we are the same at the population level. For instance, men are taller than women is a true statement about averages. An average difference does not imply that all members of population Y, men, are taller than all members of population Z, women. True statements about populations do not manifest in all individuals in those populations. Believing otherwise is falling prey to the fallacy of division, first described by Aristotle. In populations where the overlap of a trait is significant, it can be difficult to parse population-level patterns from individual experience. If you as an individual do not fit a particular pattern, the discrepancy can feel like evidence that the pattern is false, but that feeling does not make it so. In professions from medicine to sales to soldiering, men and women work together. But are we really doing the same thing? Female doctors are more likely to go into pediatrics. Men are more likely to become surgeons. In retail, men are more likely to sell cars. Women are more likely to sell flowers. And while retail jobs in the U.S. were split nearly evenly between men and women in 2019, wholesale jobs skewed strongly male. In tasks that require physical strength, men on average are simply stronger. An all-female force engaging in hand-to-hand combat would not beat an all-male one, and it would be beyond foolish to pretend otherwise. We work side by side, and some of us imagine that because we are equal under the law, we are also the same. We are and should be equal under the law. But we are not the same, despite what some activists and politicians, journalists and academics would have us believe. There seems to be comfort for some in the idea of sameness, but it is a shallow comfort at best. What if the best surgeon in the world was a woman? But it was also true that on average, most of the best surgeons were a male. What if the top 10 pediatricians were women? Neither scenario provides evidence of bias or sexism, although those are possible explanations for the observed patterns. In order to ensure that bias or sexism is not predictive of who does what work, we should remove as many barriers to success as possible. We should also not expect that men and women will make identical choices, or be driven to excel at identical things, or even perhaps be motivated by the same goals. To ignore our differences and demand uniformity is a different kind of sexism. Differences between the sexes are a reality, and while they can be cause for concern, they are also very often a strength, and we ignore them at our peril. Sex, the deep history. We have been sexual beings for at least 500 million years, since long before we were human. That number may well be an underestimate, too. It is quite possible that we have been sexual since becoming eukaryotes, anywhere from between 1 and 2 billion years ago. That is a very long time indeed. Without interruption, our sexually reproducing ancestors go back not millions, not tens of millions, but many hundreds of millions of years. Sexual reproduction has always been a messy, costly operation. You have to find an appropriate mate. You have to convince the mate that you're a good bet. It may need to be the right time of year, the mating season, or else it's possible that your gonads have been reabsorbed to save weight and to use those resources for something else. Many migratory birds do this. Male song sparrows have essentially no testes while they're migrating long distances, and they regrow a pair upon landing in their mating grounds. If you do manage to find and convince another individual of the right species and breeding status to mate with you, you may have to tend to the developing egg or fetus. You may have responsibilities that extend for years, decades even, after you have a child that is the result of sexual reproduction. Compare these to the biggest cost of all. In terms of genetic fitness, when you reproduce sexually, you are taking a 50% hit. If you cloned yourself, you would be 100% related to all of your offspring, spreading your genes with perfect accuracy. With sex, only half of your genes are in each of your kids. Given all of these costs, why on earth did sexual reproduction evolve? And why did it stick? While actively discussed among scientists still, the broad answer is that asexual reproduction is only a win for you and your offspring if the future looks exactly like the past. So long as conditions stay the same, if life worked out for you, it should work out for your clones. But conditions don't stay the same, do they? Some change is predictable, like seasonality, for instance. Most change isn't. Can you predict when and how bad the next giant flood will be, or harvest failure? Mixing up your genotype with someone else's, possibly breaking up some bad genetic combinations that have been riding around in you, perhaps discovering new good combinations and giving your offspring a chance at being a better fit in a landscape that has not yet occurred. These are the benefits of sexual reproduction. In alligators, the temperature of an egg as it develops determines the sex of its inhabitant. Low temperatures create females, high temps make males. The same is true for tortoises, but the outcomes are reversed. Cool eggs produce males, warm ones produce females. And in crocodiles and snapping turtles, intermediate temperatures produce males, while either extreme produces females. In mammals and birds and a smattering of other animals, by comparison, sex is determined chromosomally. In all but a very few species of mammals, females are XX, males are XY. Unlike in some organisms with environmental sex determination, famously clownfish, no mammals or birds have ever been known to change sex. When human sperm fertilizes an egg, all the genes in the zygote that aren't on the Y chromosome discover the sex of the individual they will become. By ratio, our genome is overwhelmingly sexless, the presence or absence of a single chromosome making the determination. But the fact of our overwhelmingly sexless genome does not imply that distinctions between the sexes are either small or arbitrary. Our chromosomes start us down a path toward femaleness and maleness. One of the genes on the Y chromosome, for instance, is SRY, which, when initiated, controls the regulation of a whole series of masculinizing actions, including the formation of what would become the testis, in which sperm is made. Hormonal cascades further masculinize a body, with testosterone and other androgens, or feminize it with estrogens and progesterone. Even when the quantity of gonadal hormones is controlled for, though, sex chromosomes themselves affect such varied differences between males and females as pain perception and response, the anatomy of individual neurons, and the size of various brain regions, including parts of the cerebral cortex and corpus callosum. All of that is true. All of these explanations are true, mechanistic, proximate explanations of how individuals become female or male in mammals. Yet these explanations can get nowhere in explaining why male and female exist at all. For that, we need ultimate-level explanations, evolutionary explanations. Explanations that begin with the question, why? Why are there two sexes in nearly all of the sexually reproducing organisms on the planet, and not 3 or 8 or 79? Fungus does things rather differently, but among plants and animals, there are only ever 2 types of gametes, reproductive cells. In order to reproduce sexually, you need 2 things: DNA from multiple individuals and a cell. The machinery of the cell, for example mitochondria and ribosomes, is big and bulky, at least compared to DNA, but it's necessary for life. So if you are going to reproduce sexually, at least one partner has to contribute that cellular machinery, known as the cytoplasm. That cell, which we call the egg, is therefore big for a cell. Trade-offs being what they are, that big cell is also largely sessile. It doesn't move. The next problem in sexual reproduction is how the gametes will find each other. Since some gametes are sessile, others need to be zippy, which is facilitated by being stripped of most of the cellular machinery that would be required to make a zygote. Those gametes are called sperm in animals, pollen in plants. They move around their environment, looking for eggs. Intermediate gametes, one with some cytoplasm and some ability to move, would be worse at both things. They would have insufficient cytoplasm to create a zygote on their own, and upon meeting a gamete that also had cytoplasm, there would be disagreement about whose to use to make a whole new life. And they would be slow to find other gametes to hook up with. Anisogamy, the evolution of 2 different, aniso, gamete sizes, gamete, therefore occurs because of the poor performance of intermediate-sized gametes. Fast forward many hundreds of million years, and differences between the sexes abound. Humans are sexually dimorphic across many domains, extending far beyond reproduction. Men and women have different disease risks, etiology, and progression, for conditions from Alzheimer's to migraine, from drug addiction to Parkinson's disease. Our brains are structured differently. We tend to have different personality traits by sex, and they are mediated by our environment. Personality differences are greater in countries that have abundant food and a low prevalence of pathogens. In general, women are more altruistic, trusting, and compliant, as well as more prone to depression than men. Men are more likely to be diagnosed with ADHD. Women are more likely to have anxiety disorders. Finally, on average, men prefer working with things, and women prefer working with people. It is no accident that, in every human culture known, there was language that distinguishes male from female. It's a human universal. Sex changes and sex roles. Sometimes conditions are so dire that normally sexually reproducing individuals become asexual in order to reproduce. Among vertebrates, this has been observed in a few snakes and a hammerhead shark. Female Komodo dragons, which strictly speaking are not actually dragons but very large lizards that live on rather small islands in eastern Indonesia, have also been known to produce viable eggs, despite having had no exposure to any other Komodo dragons. This presumably is an adaptation, a last-ditch response when you've shown up alone on an island and have none of your kind with you. It's not optimal, but it's better than nothing. Similarly, sometimes conditions are such that it is evolutionarily appropriate to change sex. In a few species of plants, many species of insects, and several clades of reef fish, sequential hermaphroditism is common, in which an individual begins as one sex and switches to the other at some point in their life. Flame wrasses, for instance, may begin life as females but transition as large adults into particularly colorful males that attract most of the sexual attention from females. Among the tetrapods, however, those vertebrates that came onto land back in the Devonian period, there was only a handful of species that are known to have switched sex, and only one that does so with regularity, the African reed frog. Among sequential hermaphrodites like flame wrasses, after a female changes into a male, he has changed not only his sex, which gamete he produces, once eggs, now sperm, but also his sex role, which is the behavioral expression of his new sex. In humans, we call this gender, or sometimes gender expression. In moose, the sex role, gender expression, of males includes engaging in showy combat, and injury is not common. In golden-collared manakins, neotropical birds, the sex role of males includes clearing an area on the forest floor and dancing on it. In great bowerbirds, the sex role of males includes building elaborate bowers, temples, if you will, which not only contain an array of carefully chosen items, but even use forced perspective, as artists do, which makes the bowers seem bigger than they are from the direction that females approach. In all of these species, the sex role of females includes choosing from among the males, the combatants, the dancers, the temple builders, and raising the children, be they moose, embryos and calves, or bird eggs and chicks. The usual rules of sex roles, then, are ones of male display and female choosiness. This stems from that long-ago difference in investment between the sexes, the large, resource-rich egg and the small, streamlined sperm. Furthermore, in those species in which parental care is necessary for the offspring to survive, which means all of mammals and birds and a good proportion of reptiles, amphibians, fish, and insects as well, males tend to put more effort into what happens before sex, and females put more effort into what happens afterwards. To put it in strictly evolutionary terms, in the vast majority of species, females are the limiting sex. Because females invest more in offspring, from eggs being larger than sperm, through parental care typically, though not always, falling to females more than males, males must compete for access to females, and females get to choose among their suitors. Males thus tend to be larger, think elephant seals, or more aggressive, as in woolly monkeys, or gaudier, peacocks, louder, nearly all frogs, or more melodious, mockingbirds, than the females of the species. There are a few rare species out there that we call sex role reversed, in which the usual rules of male display and female choosiness are flipped. Sex role reversed species have also flipped which sex invests the most when. In these cases, the male is the limiting sex. Several polyandrous waterbirds do this, including northern jacanas. Among them, we find dominant females defending large territories, inside of which a female's many male mates build nests, incubate eggs, and tend to the young. While humans don't start wars over the love of a good man, and generally don't build temples to impress husbands, in sex role reversed species of birds, these things might just happen. Still, sex role reversal, what we might call gender switching in humans, is not the same as changing sex. In mammals and birds, with our genetic sex determination, there is no sex change possible. No pigeon or parrot, no horse or human has ever changed what sex they actually are. Behavior, though, call it sex role, call it gender, that is highly labile, that is, open to change. We humans are the most labile behaviorally of all the animals. So it shouldn't surprise us too much that many of us are abandoning some old gender norms, behaviors that have in the past been tightly coupled with our sex, and configuring new ones. What it would be foolish to do, and what many Western people in the 21st century are doing, is to pretend that sex equals gender, or that gender has no relationship to sex, or that either sex or gender is not wholly evolutionary. Remember the Omega Principle, which tells us that adaptive elements of our software, that is gender, are no more independent of our hardware, sex, than the diameter of a circle is independent of that circle's circumference. Gender is more fluid than sex and has many more manifestations, but acting feminine, gender, is not the same as being female, sex. If you want, be a woman who gets into bar fights or a man who wears makeup, but don't imagine that getting into bar fights makes you a man or that wearing makeup makes you a woman. Bar fights and makeup are signals to the outside world, proxies. Proxies are not the thing itself, and these particular proxies are also outdated and regressive. Some of gender, however, is neither outdated nor regressive. Women are, on average, more likely to nest and nurture, and men are more likely, on average, to defend and explore. Observing this does not mean that men don't nurture or that women don't explore. But these population-level differences have evolved because of the underlying differences between the sexes. Pretending otherwise puts us all at risk. Ask people to believe things that are patently untrue, and they will be ever less likely to form a coherent worldview, one based on observation and reality rather than fantasy. Men will never ovulate, gestate, lactate, menstruate, or go through menopause. Women who identify as men might, but that is different. Sexual selection in humans. The moose's antlers and the fights that they have and the fact of female choice, these are all sexually selected characters. The egg incubation behavior of male American jacanas, this too is sexually selected. The radically different size of male and female elephant seals, the fact that only male frogs call, and the fact that from peacocks to quetzals to mallards, males have far showier plumage than females, all sexual selection. let us consider a few ways that men and women reveal the effects of sexual selection. Human girls develop breasts at puberty, and they persist throughout the woman's life. Breasts are, of course, functional as mammary glands with which to feed babies. In no other species of primate do breasts persist when there are no babies around to benefit. Human breasts are sexually selected, and they are doing more than feeding babies. They are also advertisements to men. Just as a lyrebird's song and a redding boar's smell and a red-capped mannequin's dance are advertisements to the females of those species. The concealment of ovulation in humans is also sexually selected. While nearly all mammals advertise fertility by physiological means, humans do not, or at least we do so far less than other species. We have also become sexually receptive throughout the year, rather than just seasonally. Concealment of ovulation serves some reproductive ends, but it also encourages something that humans do a lot of. We engage in non-reproductive sex, sex for pleasure, sex for bonding. What else is sexually selected in humans? Flowers on her birthday, neckties, fast cars, makeup, heels, and jewelry. Indeed, the physical ornamentation of women, including not just makeup and heels and jewelry, but also breasts that stay enlarged throughout our reproductive cycle, is an indicator of partial sex role reversal in humans. What does that mean? Whereas most animal species exhibit male-male competition and female choice of mates, a species with partial sex role reversal, such as we have, will also show competition between females and male choice of mates. This can manifest as anything from women advertising to attract the attention of men to outright brawls between women. Men, not coincidentally, will also be more likely to be in a position to choose their partners. Division of labor. In many modern households, women clean the floors and men take out the trash. In some households, those roles might be switched, and it might be true that both members of a pair bond spend equal time doing domestic work. But it's fairly rare for both partners to do every domestic task in equal measure. This is division of labor. From many angles, the division of labor makes sense. It has even been argued that division of labor by the sexes is what made us human. Even if we don't accept that conclusion, we can agree that it's efficient and generally a good use of everyone's time. Saving time by dividing up the work leaves more time for things we might want to do more of, like play or sex. The division of labor can and has created rigid roles, however, many of which are outdated in the 21st century. It is useful to understand some of where those roles came from in order to determine which ones are unlikely to change and which ones might. From the earliest inequalities in investment in gametes, females and males have engaged each other and the world differently. Among hunter-gatherers, men have been far more likely to be hunters of large game, women more likely to be gatherers of plant foods and smaller animals. Hunter-gatherer women likely spent most of their adult premenopausal lives pregnant or breastfeeding infants and toddlers. When breast milk is all or most of a child's diet, the mother is effectively on birth control, as she experiences physiologically induced amenorrhea. She cannot get pregnant when breastfeeding at frequent intervals. This keeps birth intervals relatively long and the birth rate fairly low. Jump forward to the human transformation of landscapes with agriculture, and gender roles became even more constrained. Being tied to a particular piece of land, we were now more sedentary and had ample grain stores with which to supplement our and our children's diets at any time. Agriculturalist women thus experienced a decrease in the birth interval. Babies came at a faster rate, and so the birth rate climbed. This increase in fertility tied women to hearth and home, and we saw a concomitant decrease in women's roles in economic, religious, and other culturally important realms. Men and women exhibit so many differences it would be impossible to catalog them all here. Before we mention just a few more, another reminder about populations is in order. When we say that men are taller than women, the words on average are implied. Pointing to the existence of your friend Rhonda, who really is quite tall, does not negate the statistical truth that on average, men are still taller than women. Some of the average differences between the sexes include that men have more investigative interests, while women have more artistic and social interests. Men are also on average more interested in math, science, and engineering. On tests, girls score higher in literacy, while boys score higher in math. And although average intelligence is the same between boys and girls, the variability in intelligence is not. There are more boy geniuses and more boy complete dullards than there are girls in either category. One interesting piece of neuroscience reveals that across several domains, including both emotional memory and spatial ability, women are better at details, men are better at gist. This finding manifests, for instance, in the average man's superior ability to remember a route, and the average woman's superior ability to remember the location of the keys, the cup of coffee, the document in need of being signed. The differences between the sexes are found in babies and across cultures too, so this is not some weird phenomenon. Given a choice, neonate girls spend more time looking at faces, while neonate boys spend more time looking at things. And across cultures, work is gendered early. In an analysis of 185 cultures, in every culture studied, some tasks are always gendered in the same direction. Iron smelting, the hunting of large marine mammals, metalworking, all of these are done by men only, in those cultures that do these things at all. More interesting is the tasks that are highly gendered across cultures, but for which some cultures curtail female involvement while other cultures curtail male involvement. These include weaving, the preparation of skins, and the gathering of fuel, among others. This suggests that there is a value in the division of labor, even when neither sex is inherently better at the task. Consider also the Pueblo people, who have long been understood to be master ceramicists. It has been assumed, given contemporary patterns, that pottery making was exclusively the domain of women. In Chaco Canyon, however, in the Four Corners area of the American Southwest, a different story is emerging. When Chaco Canyon was a rapidly growing religious and political center 1,000 years ago, the population was expanding, and with it, the demand for pottery. More and more vessels were needed to carry and store grain and water, so gender norms loosened, and men began to do this otherwise highly gendered work. What might we learn from these truths? We can learn that gender roles can be re-upped for modernity. Some men will prefer hearth and home to a grueling career that is facilitated by having a spouse taking care of the domestic duties, and some women will prefer the latter. But many men and women, we argue, will prefer to be restricted to neither domain. Without being slotted into preconceived roles, many people of both sexes will prefer a partner who is their equal without being identical. We can learn from a more nuanced understanding of gendered work that traditionalist appeals to women not working outside of the home, or to men being dominant in economic and business matters, are regressive, without any nugget of necessity or truth. Historically, women and men have had division of labor, both in family units and in societies. But other than those tasks mandated by anatomy and physiology, gestation, lactation, there was little in the modern world that some women might not choose to do. Similarly, men are ever more welcome in traditionally female fields, such as nursing and teaching, although we shouldn't expect parity there either. Different preferences lead to different choices. Pretending that we are identical, rather than ensuring that we are equal under the law, is a fool's game. Sexual strategies. It takes a lot to bring a baby into the world. While most readers of this book are likely living in a culture that assumes monogamy and biparental care, absent those constraints, men don't contribute much to the production of babies. It is also true that baby production does not end at birth, as once a baby has been successfully gestated for 9 months, mother's milk may nourish that baby for 6 months, 2 years, or more, depending on cultural norms. Maternal investment in offspring is mandated and high. Paternal investment can be high as well, of course, but is negotiable. There are many humans alive now and throughout history who never met their fathers. Across cultures, men and women report different preferences and priorities in what they are looking for in mates. In a now classic cross-cultural study, mate preferences were investigated in 37 cultures. In every culture studied, women were more interested in mates with high earning potential than were men. Furthermore, men were more interested in potential mates who are young and physically attractive than were women. Why would this be so? Women who might get pregnant will have an easier time if that child has a father who contributes to the well-being of his child and mate. So women will be selected to prefer men with the capacity to earn. Because female fertility peaks early and falls off far more steeply than male fertility does, men who might father children are more likely to be interested in youth and beauty in their mates, both of which can be understood to be proxies for fertility. Furthermore, a woman who has given birth has certainty of maternity. She knows that she is the mother of that child. Certainty of paternity is far harder to come by, but important from a not very interesting but fundamental evolutionary perspective. Because fathers have never had certainty of paternity until recent technological advances have made it possible, the evolution of jealousy and mate guarding is far more prevalent in men than in women. Across cultures, men have tried to control the reproductive activities of women in such a way that they could increase their own certainty of paternity. Among the most patently divisive and destructive are menstrual huts that isolate women during menses, and so allow men to know when in their cycle women are, and female genital mutilation, which reduces or eradicates the possibility of sexual pleasure. Do not mistake our argument here. We are justifying no such control measures, but are merely investigating them with an evolutionary lens so that we can better understand them. Another response to high uncertainty of paternity is this. There are a few cultures in which mothers' brothers act as the male role models for their sisters' children, as de facto fathers under conditions in which they may not be sure of which children they have actually fathered. Among the Nayar of southwest India, for instance, wives and husbands do not live together. They share little beyond sexual activity, and women may have multiple husbands. With such uncertainty of paternity, fathers do no paternal care, but the mother's brothers have both rights and responsibilities toward their nieces and nephews that are, to our Western eyes, quite paternal. In general, though, a man who is tricked into raising someone else's children is ridiculed. The last several paragraphs reflect established evolutionary theory. Where it gets really interesting, in our view, is what it predicts about the reproductive and therefore social strategies that men and women deploy. We introduce these here and explore their implications further in the next chapter. Broadly speaking, there are 3 possible reproductive strategies. 1. Partner up and invest long-term, reproductively, socially, and emotionally. 2. Force reproduction on an unwilling partner. 3. Force nobody, but also invest little beyond short-term sexual activity. Women, being constrained by both gestation and lactation, and mate choice historically being in service of the production of children, have not had much flexibility in terms of strategy. Women were largely tied to strategy number 1. Until very recently, women preferred long-term partners to one-night stands, and they were far more likely than men to be sexually reticent, or coy in the language of evolutionary biology. Women have thus tended to engage in a long game, looking for a man with whom to partner, to co-parent, and to grow old together. This is the best strategy for women if they want to leave their genetic mark in the next generation. Gestation and lactation are anatomically, physiologically mandated features of being a female mammal. Given that women are forced by nature to invest in their children, they have a better chance of successfully parenting if they have a partner who is vested as well. This strategy of looking for and staying with a long-term mate with whom you raise children and make a life together is also a possible reproductive strategy for men. All 3 of these strategies are open to men, but the first one is the male strategy that is best for society, best for children, best for women, and best for all but a handful of men. Strategy 1 is the long game, the emotionally invested strategy. This leaves 2 strategies that have historically been exclusively the domain of men. Of these remaining possibilities that men have historically chosen, one is patently morally reprehensible. Rape has allowed men to successfully reproduce, especially in times of war. Nobody will defend rape as honorable or desirable for individuals or for society. Rape is reproductive strategy 2. The final alternative male strategy, however, is also not honorable or desirable for society, and yet has been encouraged for women by sex-positive activists as a sign of freedom and escape from Puritanism. This third reproductive strategy is that of one-night stands, of sex with strangers, of sex without commitment or expectation. This strategy does not involve force. Many women will often willingly sleep with a guy they just met. Such sexual liaisons do tend to come with some deceit, though, often by both parties. If women adopting some of the worst traits of men is our evidence of equality and freedom, we need to reinvestigate our values. This is reproductive strategy 3, sex with neither force nor investment, the short game. As women have increasingly engaged in reproductive strategy 3, the short game, sex has become more mundane and easier to source. Contra the messaging of sex-positive feminists, engaging in this short game diminishes the sexual power of women. When people of both sexes are routinely seeking frivolous, no emotional connection sex, they are creating conditions in which everyone is behaving like men at their second worst. It's not as bad as rape, obviously. But it's not as good as strategy 1 either. Society sliding toward this third reproductive strategy for both men and women is a variation on the sucker's folly, the tendency of concentrated short-term benefit, sexual pleasure, not only to obscure risk and long-term cost, but also to drive acceptance even when the net analysis is negative, in reducing the chances of finding love and all that flows from it. Furthermore, women often don't intuit that there are 2 distinct male strategies aside from rape, and so are often advertising toward men engaged in strategy 3, the one that looks for one-night stands, while actually angling for men interested in strategy 1. Hotness is a manifestation of sexual strategy 3 gaining primacy. Beauty, by comparison, is a manifestation of the first sexual strategy, the one that's in it for the long term. Hotness fades fast with reproductive potential. Beauty fades far more slowly. We are due for a major renegotiation of the deal between the sexes. We cannot go back and must not stay here. Failures of reductionism redux. Pornography. Finally, a cautionary note about pornography. There is no such thing as having sex. It's not like watching Netflix or playing the guitar. Sex is interactional and emergent, such that having sex with person A is not the same as having sex with person B. This is once again the mistake of reductionism, imagining that a proxy for a thing is the whole thing. Imagining that if we can count and record it, then we have counted and recorded the vital heart of the thing. Chemical imbalance is mental illness. Energy drinks are food. Porn is sex. Wrong on all counts. Of course, people are fascinated by human sexuality. There is information in watching others about hazards and opportunities, both evolutionary and personal. Doing so triggers that third sexual strategy, though, the one that wants to get onto the act of sex right away, the one in which it doesn't matter who it is that one is having sex with. Just as jealousy varies by sex, men are more likely to be jealous of physical infidelity. Women are more likely to be jealous of emotional infidelity. So too do the target audiences of porn and erotica vary by sex. In general, women prefer erotica, which brings with it a backstory, as it were. Porn, targeting that third sexual strategy, reduces human bodies to our constituent parts and puts a premium on extreme sexual acts as a result of economic competition for attention. Among populations that have come of age on a steady diet of porn, women are far more likely to report being asked to engage in anal sex, strangling, and other violent games that are represented on screen, even though few real women want these things in life. Porn, we posit, produces what we will call sexual autism. Of course, we are using the word autism metaphorically. It goes without saying that we mean no offense to those who have been diagnosed with autism in a clinical sense, nor are we arguing that people with autism don't desire true connection, love, and relationships any less than all the rest of us. Here, we take the diagnostic criteria for autism and suggest that porn produces, in its adherents, something similar with regard to sexuality. Incoming sensory data are of primary importance, and emotional and social communication is backgrounded if considered at all. Those who learn sexual behavior via porn tend to display repetitive behavior and atypical sensitivity to sensory inputs. Sexual communication is difficult for them, probably because communication is a two-way street, and the other person cannot be fully predicted in advance or controlled. People who have learned about sex through porn have difficulty developing, maintaining, and understanding sexual relationships, insist on inflexible adherence to routine, and show intense fixation on narrow interests. It is, in short, difficult for them to contend with novelty and surprise. With discovery, I didn't know I could feel that way. And with emergence, I didn't know we could feel that way. If the most complete human sexuality is, as we argue, an emergent property between whole individuals, bodies and brains, hearts and psyches, porn reduces sex to commodity, to acts, to mere bodies. Selecting from a narrow menu of options, sex learned from porn will be repetitive and inflexible, with a narrow focus on orgasm. Those who learn about sex from porn are likely to be insensitive to feedback from anything but their own body. Communication and feedback will not be priorities, nor perhaps understood as values at all. Relationships will be difficult to form, harder still to understand. Discovery and serendipity never happen when choosing from a menu. This is safer in a way. While you risk not discovering the true highs of human relationship and connection, you are also protected from some of the true lows. Sex learned from porn can thus effectively flatten human sexuality. What of the world of emotional, deeply human discoveries that are possible with a richly connected sexuality? Without those, you might as well just be going for a walk. The corrective lens. Avoid sex without commitment, including sex for hire. Cheapening sex by seeking it everywhere and at all times renders it more difficult to form a stable bond with one individual, which is the best predictor of a relationship of equals, in which neither partner feels chronically subservient or undervalued. Instead, seek ecstasy and passion, which are more consistently discovered with someone whom you know well and who knows you well. For straight women, do not succumb to social pressure to embrace easy sex. If you aren't interested in sleeping with a guy within hours or days of meeting him, and he passes you by for someone who is, what have you lost? You have lost access to a guy dedicated to strategy 3. You are better off looking for a good guy who is capable of and interested in refusing to act on his basest impulses. Keep children far away from pornography. Try to keep yourself away from it as well. The market should not be allowed to intrude on several things, including but not limited to love and sex, music, and humor. Do not interfere with children's development by trying to block, pause, or radically alter their development. Gender is the behavioral expression of sex, and so is both a product of evolution and more fluid than is sex. Childhood is a time of identity exploration and formation. Children's claims to be the sex that they are not should therefore not be indulged as anything beyond normal play and searching for boundaries. While actually intersex individuals are real and incredibly rare, and actually transgendered people are also real and very rare, much of modern gender ideology is dangerous and contagious, and many of the interventions, hormonal, surgical, are not reversible. Keep contaminants away from fetuses and children. In several species of frogs, there is an established relationship between exposure to common environmental contaminants, like atrazine and herbicide, and an increase in hermaphroditic individuals. While sex determination in frogs is different than in humans, we will not be surprised if it turns out that some of the modern confusion around sex and gender ends up attributable to widespread endocrine disruptors in our environment. Finally, recognize that our differences contribute to our collective strength. If we more highly valued work that women are more likely to be drawn to, like teaching, social work, and nursing, perhaps we could stop demanding equal representation of men and women in fields that women are simply not as likely to be interested in. Recognizing that we are, on average, different is the critical first step to building a society in which all opportunities are truly open to everyone. Equal opportunity is an honorable goal in step with reality, whereas aiming for equal outcome, in which every occupation, from daycare workers to garbage collectors, has equal representation between the sexes, will disappoint everyone involved. If you enjoyed this, consider picking up Hunter-Gatherer's Guide to the 21st Century, Evolution and the Challenges of Modern Life. I'm Heather Hying. I co-wrote this book with Bret Weinstein. You can also find more of my writing at Natural Selections, my weekly Substack, and Bret and I do a podcast called DarkHorse. You can find us anywhere you find your podcasts. This has been an episode of After School. Thank you very much.